Me, still very much an internet user. I just left this. Donald Trump had a conflict with Elon Musk, and this whole thing just isn't enough. The root cause, this brick and beautiful do. Then on Friday night, a few senators came to find me, gave us a notice, and used something called rack consideration. This only happens once a year, only once a month, to get the budget passed, and for things unrelated to the budget, you can only use it 3 times for a Chinese vote. In our committee, they came to find us and even got someone to give you an almond document. Galena, the cleric, has done it before, rushed out to do it, and if you're lucky, you can use a dog to return to Anshi to look for it right. How many stripes can you teach a dog? If you can get 3 more votes, that would be good too. As for the main line of control, let's take a closer look and examine it. The Nigel bill. The impact on the American public and on the world economy. All right, after 27 hours and 46 amendment votes, the Senate Republicans finally passed this massive tax and spending bill by a vote of 51 to 50. Actually, it was still 50 to 50, and the vice president had to step in and cast the tie-breaking vote. So it could be said that it passed by 51 to 50, just barely scraping by with 1 extra vote. That's how it managed to pass, just barely. So whose vote was the key one? That key vote came from a Republican congresswoman from Alaska. She was originally worried that Medicaid would be bad for her state, but once the Medicare cuts were negotiated, she ended up casting the deciding vote. Do I like this bill or not? I think it was too rushed, forced by an artificial deadline. It was also the most difficult and painful 24 hours since I entered politics. All right, now I don't have to go to court. And what about the cuts to SNAP and Medicare? If you think it will hurt you, actually, it will hurt me too. You're mistaken. The answer is that we were able to successfully secure exemptions for Alaska and Hawaii, so they are completely excluded and not affected by SNAP, meaning not affected by the food stamp program. No one else is affected. It's just that Hawaii and Alaska had their special circumstances addressed by increasing the federal funding ratio for Medicare. Alaska gets an extra 2%, 1 from the original and 1 from the amendment. The way Reno pronounced it, it was obvious this was a special favor for Alaska, giving them a higher percentage than other states. All the other states agreed, so it came down to that one suspicious vote. The opposition's position is that this bill will increase the U.S. national debt by $2.40 to $3.30 trillion over the next 10 years. That's an extra $300 billion in deficit every year. And it will also cause 12 to 18 million Americans to lose their health care coverage. That's a huge deal. In the U.S., if you don't have health care coverage, that's a big deal. Imagine if 10 to 20 million more Americans lose their health insurance. What happens to those people without coverage? If you get seriously ill, who's going to take care of you? Even my elderly mother is on Medicare. Elon Musk is clearly against this because he thinks it will hurt the development of the new energy industry. This goes against the principle. Even in Guangzhou, Tesla is popular because of its appeal. So why is new energy already taking off in Taiwan too? We're using new energy sources, and I have to say, I'm really surprised by Donald Trump's stance. What did he say? He didn't mention anything about clean and beautiful energy. It's all just about quick thrills and flashy things. Then he turns around and opposes wind power, saying it ruins America's beauty. From my perspective, I just don't get it. He's also against solar panels, and I really don't understand his opposition. The Senate Majority Leader is a Democrat. It's a disastrous piece of legislation. And then there's that monster, that so-called monster. It really is a monster. This big and beautiful bill, so what's the next step? Because it was passed through reconciliation, it's quite different. Now it goes back to the House of Representatives, where it needs to be amended and voted on again. Once it passes, it will be sent to the President to sign. The bill needs to be completed by July 4th Eastern Time. That's the deadline Donald Trump set. If the House makes any major changes again, then it has to go back to the conference committee with the Senate, and then the Senate has to pass it once more. That's basically how it works. In the 2026 midterm elections, this bill will become the main target for attacks from the Democrats: deficit expansion, cuts to health care. Now, as for internal party disagreements, let me talk about these three people who went against the party's position to oppose this plan. The far-right House Freedom Caucus is strongly dissatisfied with the Senate's version. In the House, they criticize that it could add up to $651 billion to the deficit each year, and the Medicaid cuts are even more disliked by the House, causing many people to lose out. This isn't what we originally agreed on. Actually, back then, they reached a compromise, and that compromise meant their version couldn't be so harsh. Because if you're that harsh on Medicaid, the poor will definitely push back against you. And the deficit is just too big. Donald Trump is demanding that the legislative process be completed before July 4th, but the House insists on passing it quickly. In reality, the Senate's version is almost impossible to pass. It's nearly impossible. Within the Republican Party, there are divisions. Those who support the bill are satisfied with the deficit reduction and the shrinking of welfare, and they want even deeper cuts to education and funding for left-wing policies. But the moderates tend to oppose it because of pressure from their constituencies. Cutting education funding has angered parents, and cuts to health care. Well, what about those low-income senior voters? How are you going to handle those votes? Cutting subsidies for local communities has triggered backlash from state governments and mayors. According to internal estimates from Politico, there are currently 12 to 15 Republican members in the House who are unwilling to unconditionally accept the current version. If there are no changes, the bill will either be rejected or its review will be delayed. It only takes a few defectors. Last time there were 3, and the bill passed by just 1 vote. But what if there are 6 defectors? Then it won't pass in the House, because that version is different and would actually need to be rewritten. All right, the Democrats can use procedural tactics to obstruct. In the Senate, they've already required the clerk to read the 940-page bill word for word and started a vote-a-rama, a marathon of continuous voting going late into the night. It's expected that the same tactic will be used in the House, using the so-called magic minute. The Democratic leader is considering this approach. The magic minute works like this. The leaders of the minority party can speak for an unlimited amount of time during that minute. They could talk for a whole week if they wanted to. So imagine how they might prepare to speak for an entire week. This is an extreme form of filibustering. Maybe they'll even break the record for the longest filibuster. Their stance is clear. They will do everything in their power to prevent the bill from passing. Jeffries is considering every possible procedural tactic, dragging out the bill for a whole week or even longer. According to the Senate bill, it extends and makes permanent Donald Trump's personal income tax cuts, and also expands the state and local tax, SALT, deduction for high-income earners. The SALT deduction is raised to $40,000, but in reality, the people who benefit are taxpayers making over $200,000. They're the ones getting this tax break. The capital gains tax is reduced by 2%. Wow, that's a big win for people in the stock market. Car loan interest, overtime pay, and medical expense deductions for seniors are included, but you need to meet a high threshold to benefit. So in the end, it's those with very high incomes who actually benefit. So who does he say benefits from this? High-income earners, people with children, traditional car manufacturers, and those who receive tips. These are the winners. And who loses out? It's people who receive food stamps, those who rely on assistance, Medicaid beneficiaries, electric vehicle manufacturers, and not just them, it's everyone involved in renewable energy too. They miss this point. Renewable energy is a big issue. To balance the budget, they're making major spending cuts. The first to be hit are the vulnerable groups. Medicaid support will be cut by 12%, and new work requirements will be introduced, which is expected to disqualify 8 million people. If you don't work, even if you have no money, you won't get Medicaid. For SNAP, you'll be forced to work. Even if you're just scraping by, you'll have to work at least 20 hours a week. If you don't, you won't get SNAP benefits. Public housing construction will be cut by 34%, meaning even fewer public housing units. Federal grants for college students will be frozen for 4 years, making it even harder for struggling families to survive. All right, let's see what the scholars are saying. Dr. Grand from Columbia University's Social Policy Department says that, on the surface, this is a tax reform, but in reality, it's a structural blow to vulnerable communities. Especially since the economy hasn't fully recovered after the pandemic, cutting social welfare will push low-income families into even deeper poverty, widening the gap between rich and poor. And according to an economist from the University of Washington, what they call support for the middle class actually just increases the wealth gap, and the middle class won't even be able to benefit from the tax cuts. With rising costs in healthcare, education, and housing, the U.S. nonprofit organization Policy Priorities says that this massive tax cut will increase the U.S. fiscal deficit by at least $2.3 trillion over the next decade, giving tax breaks to the wealthy while making everyone else foot the bill. All right, and then, regarding USAID, the United States Agency for International Development, this is from the most authoritative academic journal, The Lancet, which published a large-scale study. Since 2000, U.S.-led global public aid, including vaccine delivery, anti-malaria efforts, and maternal and child care, has saved 93 million lives over the past 20 years. The Senate version of the big and beautiful deal explicitly removes the $18 billion in funding over the next 3 years for the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief and the Global Vaccine Alliance. If this continues, according to The Lancet, by 2030, an additional 10 million people could die because of the reduction in vaccine coordination and emergency foreign aid. Especially in regions like Africa and Southeast Asia, 10.7 million people could die. Professor Nancy Glass from Johns Hopkins University said that for churches, These appropriations might just be accounting numbers, but in impoverished regions, they represent anti-epidemic medicines, infant vaccines, and even lifelines. In the past, these efforts have successfully saved 93 million people, and now another 10 million are expected to die. This is not just a budget item, it's a choice about civilization. Organizations like Doctors Without Borders, the American Red Cross, and the Bill Gates Foundation have all signed a joint letter urging the U.S. Congress to restore its commitment to global health in the final version. The current bill to cut funding will create a humanitarian disaster that is foreseeable, preventable, but tacitly allowed by you. If those lives are lost, then we are heading back to the days when the USA was withdrawing from its role as a beacon for America, just like Free Asia and others who have already left or are planning to leave Asia. How do Americans feel about this? Let's look at a few public opinion polls. Here are some polls. This one shows 55% opposed. Fox has 59% opposed. Fox and the Washington Post at least 42%. KFF is the highest at 64%. And the one Pete asked about is 49%. No matter how you look at it, the majority are against it. The number of people opposed is 2 to 1 compared to those in favor. It's a 2 to 1 ratio. So, what's the difference between the Senate and House versions of the bill? First, the original content was to make the 2017 tax cuts, which were set to expire in 2025, permanent. This would ensure that the current income tax rates remain in effect, so there's no need to worry about tax increases. Second, the child tax credit. The Senate raised it to $2,200, but at least one parent must have a valid Social Security number, meaning they can't be undocumented immigrants. What about the House? The Senate raised it to $2,200, while the House raised it to $2,500, but only extended it until 2028, not permanently. That's the difference. In the Senate, Senator Bennett called for increased assistance, but because of party divisions, it didn't pass. As a result, the Senate set the state and local tax deduction cap at $20,000, not $25,000. The consensus between the House and Senate is that, in the short term, the deduction cap is $40,000. The Senate's amendment is to revert back to $10,000 after 5 years, while the House's version was $40,000 indefinitely. The Senate would return to $10,000 after 5 years. For tips, the tax-free tip cap is $25,000. The overtime cap is $1,200 or $12,500. For incomes above $150,000, the benefit is gradually phased out. This is a temporary measure, effective from 2025 to 2028, and will automatically end afterward. For car loans, you can deduct up to $10,000 in interest on new cars. As for the additional deduction for seniors, both House and Senate versions set it at $4,000, but Senate added $2,000. For charitable donations, the House allows $150, while the Senate allows $1,000 for singles. There's also a work requirement for those receiving medical assistance. The Senate version is stricter. If parents have children over 15 years old, they must work to qualify. So, if you have children to take care of and are unemployed, you can still receive Medicaid. But if your children are over 15, then even if you have kids, you're not eligible because children over 15 are expected to take care of themselves, so you have to go out and work. The Medicaid provider tax, which is a mechanism states use to increase federal funding, will be reduced from 6% to 3.5%, affecting government revenue. As compensation, $50 billion will be provided over 5 years for rural hospitals, but at the same time, $1 trillion in federal funding is being cut. Regarding medical assistance for undocumented immigrants, canceling Medicaid for undocumented individuals in states that provide it is not legal. The U.S. Congressional Budget Office has rejected it, so denying them medical assistance is not allowed. For food stamps, eligibility is expanded so people aged 18 to 64 must work to receive them. Cost sharing will be adjusted based on each state's error rate. If your state improperly distributes benefits, it will pay more. Colorado's error rate is nearly 10%, so every year they have to pay an extra $200 million. Alaska and the 9 states with the highest error rates can delay for 2 years. This is what Alaska used as leverage for voting. In the House, the work requirement is set for children over 6 years old, but in the Senate, it was changed so that only those over 14 need to work. For electric vehicle tax credits, under the Senate version, they end at the end of September, while the House version ends at the end of the year. The Senate moved up the deadline. The 25D tax credit for residential clean energy takes effect immediately. The attempt to delay it until 2026 was unsuccessful. The removal of tax exemptions for wind and solar energy means that projects started within 1 year are still eligible for exemption, but they must be completed within 2 years. Artificial intelligence. This AI pause regulation clause states that if state governments don't comply, they will lose $500 million in AI infrastructure funding over 10 years. In other words, state governments can't regulate AI unless the federal government allocates money to them. So, what was the outcome? It was canceled, deleted. That's what happened. This basically lets big tech companies exploit kids and conservatives. Some people say this is why AI stocks dropped, but I don't agree with that. All right, now about the loan system. This includes the SAFE plan from the Biden era, the termination of Grant Plus and graduate student loans, and a cap of $65,000 on Parent Plus loans, which is due to concerns about parents. Okay, for the 2026 standard repayment plan, there will be a 10 to 20-year income-driven repayment plan. It calculates how much you have to pay back based on your income after graduation. Government pensions, except for Congress and law enforcement, will see all federal pension contributions, as high as 18.6%, eliminated. This is a subsidy. So, what's the result? And the stock market? The S&P dropped less with the previous close. As for the Nasdaq, it fell by almost 1%, mainly because Tesla dropped.